quickly, I'll make a few comments. I think Gabby probably told you, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I thought it was appropriate, though, first, with what we're going to be facing next week, to talk just a few minutes, please, of personal privilege about my friend, Governor Bond. Kit was the definition of a statesman. I've said to several people, if you looked in Webster's dictionary under statesman, and there was a picture that would be Kit Bond. I'm blessed to have known Kit and honored to have called him a friend and a mentor, as I think hundreds, maybe thousands of Missourians share the same sentiment. Governor Bond held several titles, including United States Senator, but he always said to me, whenever I asked him what to call him, he said, you know, Governor was the best title I ever had. Kit kept Missouri's interests at heart, both in office, in and out, making our state a better place to live, work, and raise a family. On behalf of all Missourians, Claudia and I share our deepest condolences and offer our prayers for his wife, Linda, his son, Sam, and the entire Bond family. Next week on Tuesday, a state memorial service honoring the life and legacy of Governor Kit Bond will be held here in the rotunda of the Missouri State Capitol at noon. The public is invited to attend, but we want to make sure the public understands that he'll be lying in state for 24 hours. So at any time that's convenient for somebody who wants to come by and pay their respects, they should not feel like they have to be here at noon. They'll have 24 hours to do so. So thank you for remembering my friend, a Missouri's friend, and a true statesman, Governor Kit Bond. On to the legislative recap. As the regular session is now wrapped up, I'd like to thank the House and Senate leadership and the entire 103rd General Assembly for their work this session. I also want to thank my team, both here in the governor's office and the many state agency leaders who advocate for our administration's priorities this session. I think Roy Blunt used to say the best thing a leader can do is hire the greatest people around him to help him lead. And we certainly have had the best team for somebody who's just been on the job, 5 months with the first session. Adam Gresham, our chief, and many other people in this, within our team really worked very hard on this session, as well as our cabinet leaders. And I couldn't be more blessed. Good people around me. It's always made me look good in my private life and family life as well. So I'm super happy and thankful for the team that has worked very hard to push our priorities forward. As I said at the start of my first State of the State address to these legislators, I've sat where they sit. I understand the pressures they face, and I want to work with them, not against them, because I believe we can only secure Missouri's future if we work together. Governing is truly a team sport. It requires trust, respect, and a willingness to listen, to truly listen, even when we disagree. Every year there are spirited debates, there's tough negotiations, there's moments where compromise feels just out of reach. But that is the nature and the beauty of our government. This session we made it a priority to walk the halls, not just to meet with lawmakers, but to build relationships, have real discourse, and understand what mattered most to the people they represent. Because progress starts with relationships and open conversations, and many people in this room, if not every person in this room, has seen us walking those halls, and I very much enjoyed doing that. I think you all know I'm a people person, and I really do. Relationships in this building is what matters, and I intended to set the tone by having those relationships myself. These conversations, I believe, paid off. We made historic progress, strengthening the support for law enforcement and public safety, advancing bold initiatives in economic development, protecting the future of agriculture, and delivering on our promise to invest in bridges, highways, children's, and schools. In our legislative priorities, public safety was our number one, and we were pleased that the legislation passed a state budget and legislature that supports those who protect us, including many critical pieces of our Safer Missouri Public Safety Initiative, including House Bill 495, which I've signed and you know much about, establishes over 25 pieces of legislation that helps law enforcement across the state, including the City of St. Louis piece that got a lot of attention. Senate Bill 71 that creates tuition awards for our longtime public safety personnel and their dependents. We said all the time this is going to be about retention and recruitment. I think that really goes a long way, and I really appreciate Representative Hinman and Senator Gregory on that. Funding for the Missouri Blue Shield Community Grants. We signed the Blue Shield Executive Order. I think as of today, in just maybe 6 weeks, we're well over 100 Blue Shield cities already approved and many more in the queue. So lots of communities around the state very interested in becoming a Blue Shield community. Funding for our Operation Relentless Pursuit, which you've seen some numbers on that. We've worked in coordination with sheriff's departments, with highway patrol, with local law enforcement municipalities to really bring in some of the worst criminals that we've had warrants out on for a long time. And that number's over 150, I think, at this point in just a few short weeks that we launched that. In agriculture, the legislature made progress in supporting the Missouri agriculture through a permanent funding of Missouri FFA and supporting additional health coverage for Missouri farm families. I think that was a huge bill that the House just ended up finishing that week, and I know Farm Bureau was very much behind that bill, but speaking for farm families across the state who could not get insurance, that's a big piece of legislation for agriculture. Education, we appreciate the legislature for working to ensure that every Missouri student has the opportunity to get a world-class education. Historic funding through the K through 12 formula, career and technical education formula, $50 million for the ESA program, and a big piece of legislation. Senator Henderson did a great job of banning cell phones in schools from bell to bell. And we look forward to reviewing critical legislation passed to better serve our children and foster care system. Veterans and military services, I was proud to see funding for our veterans homes, nurse call systems, and electric health record systems for Missouri veterans. In government improvements, we appreciate the legislature for including the budget for the 1% salary increase for every 2 years of service for all state employees. I know the House and Senate had different positions. The Senate actually took up our position, but they worked together to get back to that, and I'm very appreciative that we were able to do that. In economic development, I think you all know, 35 years as a small businessman and entrepreneur. One of the best parts of this job is working on, and my favorite part is working on economic development to assure investment and growth in our state. I think that House Bill 567 passed this week to protect small businesses was a huge step in that direction, and that's something I heard about multiple times a day, every day this session, from businesses all across the state and from prospective businesses looking at us. We also secured incredible wins in many areas that touch economic development efforts, including child care, infrastructure, and tort reform. Investing in child care and improving the regulatory environment around child care continues to be a critical priority for our administration. Thanks to the legislative approval, providers will receive payments from the state at the beginning of the month, and we will pay on enrollment. And I've heard from every provider that I've talked to, that's a big piece of making sure their business can still function and work properly. We've already signed major utility legislation that opens opportunity for more economic development efforts and ensures we can generate safe, affordable, and reliable power. I appreciate Senator Laughlin and Senator Serpoy on Senate Bill 4, as well as their House counterparts, for making sure that was a priority. That was a big piece of legislation that we need for our economic future and conversations. And thank you to the General Assembly for sending historic legislation to my desk that eliminates Missouri's capital gains tax. And we look forward to working on even more tax cuts in the future. And eventually we will have a plan and are continuing to work on it. It's a big piece to eliminate the state income tax, and hope to present a plan for the consideration of the legislation in the next session. Finally, this week the legislature also passed H.R. 73, critical pro-life legislation. Voter approval will be needed to amend the Senate Constitution to adopt new language to better protect the health of Missouri women. We look forward to reviewing all the legislation that's now been sent to my desk. This has been a successful session, and I don't think there's any other way to describe it. I've been in this building a long time. The last several years have been bumpy, and people have left in a lot worse mood than they did this week. This session overall should not be defined by the last 2 weeks. This session should be defined with 19 weeks. I really believe we made some great progress, and really proud of what the House and Senate and both sides of the aisle and some critical legislation where they came together, negotiated out a compromise, and put something forward. I saw the process work better this year than I have in a long time, and I'm really proud of what they've gotten done. So with that, I'm happy to take a few questions, and I think we've got some microphones out for you guys.
Governor, are you going to call a special session related to the Chiefs and Royals funding?
Yeah, I've said publicly, and I've told leadership as we were working with team ownership and local authorities in the Kansas City area, that this is a huge economic development package, and you've heard me say that many times. Governors from both parties have called special sessions for economic development packages before. I think the most recent one, the GM package, was a $1.5 billion investment that I believe Governor Parson called. You know, the Chiefs and Royals packages, and this has been very public about remodeling on the Arrowhead Stadium and a potential new baseball stadium, are somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion. I would consider that significant economic development. So, as you know, we introduced that in the last week of session to try to find what the feelings were. House gave it a great vote, but it's an important piece of economic development, and we definitely will be looking at a way to try to get that back before the General Assembly as well.
So you said this morning on the radio that you're going to have a special session.
Yeah, I just said we'll look forward to get that back before the General Assembly as well.
When will the session?
We haven't decided a date yet. I'm one of those people that like to work with leadership in both the House and Senate and find out. No date will be easy, but that, again, is a critical piece of economic development that I'd like to see us make sure we can solidify our offer with a legislative approval.
Is there anything you plan to do since the House killed the HB 19 spending bill of $513 million? It's got that new livestock barn at the State Fair, KC Mental Hospital, all sorts of stuff.
Oh, I'm aware of the projects that were in there. You know, the House position on trying to leave a significant amount of money on the bottom line for future years that we might see a tougher budget process. I respect their position doing that. And we worked through the budget, the House and Senate leadership, they did a great job of working through all the other bills. So Lisa, the answer to House Bill 19 is that we're reviewing what our options are in that bill at this time, because I know there's some critical things in there, and so we'll see where that ends up.
Yeah, at least one Senate Democratic, as much as she loves the Chiefs, she's like, how can I put the Chiefs in front of hospital dollars and funding for that? Would you be interested in doing not only stadium special session, but also issues in House Bill 19?
Yeah, I've heard and listened to quite a few Senate and representatives from both sides of the aisle on that very same issue, and I understand what their concerns are, and I think it's fair to say everything is on the table of what that special session might look like.
Governor, I have a couple questions. Are you going to wait until the November 2026 ballot for the abortion rights do-over, or will you call a special election earlier?
Yeah, Mark, we just had that happen this week where they passed that. We haven't looked at what all the options are. We don't have a date certain that we would look for calling that, but you're right. It's right now, if nothing happens, I believe it happens in November of 2026. So we'll look at what the options are and what's good for Missourians.
And another thing I'm interested in is, will you sign the Senate bill that scraps the mandatory sick leave in Proposition A?
Is it the House bill that we just approved this week?
Correct.
Yes. I'll take a look at it, but I'm a big fan of that bill. As I mentioned earlier, it's a huge issue to both small and large business and economic developers. And look, I'm a capitalist in a free market. I do not think that we should allow, in this case, a very liberal group from the East Coast of our country come in and spend millions of dollars to put a question on the ballot that has nothing to do with the input of individually, privately owned businesses, and I'm not a big fan of mandates. I think the markets should set what employees get paid and what the compensation are, and I know businesses are very competitive in doing that, and they're always going to try to take care of their employees the best they can so they don't lose them to the business down the street, and that's something individual business owners should decide, not some piece of legislation that was introduced by somebody not even from the state.
The feds want 20,000 National Guard troops to help with mass deportations. Will Missouri be participating in that?
Well, I don't know that we have a role in that just yet, but I've read the article just as you have. To my knowledge, we haven't had any official discussions about that just yet.
Governor, on the stadium issue, St. Louis, your hometown, has lost 2 NFL teams. Does that make you work harder to save the KC teams, or does that make you more wary of committing taxpayer dollars to?
Well, look, as you heard Rudy say, who listened probably to the same radio station I did this morning, the Kansas, I think was it the speaker, Rudy, that was on this morning with Mundo, was saying that they think they have the Chiefs and Royals in the bag, that they're very confident of what they have. It's a very competitive environment on the west side of the state for those teams, and certainly to your point, Kurt, St. Louis has seen its losses of teams. The legislation we passed would be applicable for other major league teams, so it would be something that could be used in St. Louis if appropriate, with the proper investment and the proper caps that are outlined in that legislation. So we'll see if that's an important piece to pass so that it's equally used amongst teams, should it be needed in the future.
Minority Leader Ani yesterday suggested that it was malpractice to play the negotiations on the stadium bill as close to the vest as it appears it was. were you caught off guard by HB 19 getting killed in the House? And looking back, had there been more involvement with House leadership on the stadium bill before that? Might we be at a different place today?
No, the Professional Sports Teams Act, or I think is what we're calling it possibly, like any economic development package, we had a non-disclosure agreement with the teams because there's a lot of confidential information that gets shared when we try to put together an economic development package. So we did have House and Senate leadership involved in that for probably the last 12 weeks, working on what different tools in the toolbox we have would work. And so we had to, because just like I say, I don't care what economic development package that's that large that's moving in, there's some confidential conversations that go on with that. And certainly my intentions always have been, and you probably heard me say for weeks, that if we come to a package that works, that we think is viable, it likely would require a special session anyway, just because of what I outlined earlier. Most of our largest, if not all of our largest recent economic development proposals have required a special session.
Governor, are you waiting for DSS Director Bass and Children's Division Director Smith to get their bearings and reorganize the Children's Division before they ask for higher starting salaries for their employees?
They are already on that, Jason. I'm not waiting for them to get their wings. They're working very hard to come up with some of the solutions that you and I have talked about many times. And they know that was a priority for me, and I appreciate your passion on that, but we're not going to have to wait on that. I think you'll see some action from them pretty quickly. 2026? Yes, sir. 25 or 26.
Governor Kehoe, Kara Hart, Brownfield Ag News. For agriculture, there were several key issues that didn't make it across the finish line this session. How do you prioritize which bills get the attention first as you review and provide your final stamp of approval for ag issues?
This is obviously my first year doing bill review, and we do have quite a few bills that came across. We'll review them all, to answer your question, before the deadline. I think it's July 14th. Make sure that we give them all a good review to make sure everything is appropriate in it. But as I've stated, and as I stated again this morning, agriculture is a huge focus for me, and I'm glad it was a huge focus of both the House and Senate this year. So we will be giving those high priority as we move forward, just really with as rest of the legislation.
There was a pesticide labeling bill that didn't make it across the finish line. Were you watching that closely, and any comments on the fact that it failed? Do you see that maybe being an issue for Missouri agriculture moving forward?
Which bill, I'm sorry?
It was a Dane Deal sponsored bill. Let me pull it up here. It was House Bill 544.
Oh, the pesticide bill, labeling bill, we call that. Yeah, sorry, I'm not as good as with the numbers as I know the subjects. I was disappointed that didn't make it across the line. That very much is a bill that's being held out by the trial bar, and I understand why. They've made tens of millions of dollars off of lawsuits with those particular chemicals. The problem that Missourians never get the message out on, if for some reason that particular product is not produced anymore in the United States, farmers are still going to need that type of product, that type of weed control. And so that glyphosate, I think is what it's called, or will be produced somewhere. And if it is, it won't be produced in this country. And farmers will not have the same protections and liability recourse back on the companies who make it if it's made in China or somewhere overseas. So this whole notion that if we make it hard enough to make that here, it will just go away and nobody will have it to use anymore is not accurate. The agriculture community is very resourceful, and when they need a product that they rely on, whether it's made here or not, they will find it from somewhere to continue to use it. So I was disappointed that bill didn't get passed. It's very important to many of our ag producers across the state, as well as the actual manufacturers that make those products. Well, as you know, the House and Senate came to some different agreements and pieces of the budget. We haven't been able to, we are, as we speak, putting all those pieces together back into the framework to make sure we understand how everything affects. But as I said earlier when we talked about House Bill 19, the House very much and we very much were in favor of leaving significant money on the bottom line for future years, Rudy. I know households and businesses in Missouri do the same thing. And I don't think it's ever appropriate for some politician to think just because we have it, we have to spend it. I think it's more appropriate for us to leave some reserves in the tank for the times when the budget does get tougher, and I think you're right. I think the budget could get a little more challenging in the next couple of years. We hope that we have enough economic success and economic development in the state that helps us work through that. I think that's a balance that we will hope to put in place, but we want to be prepared.
We still have time for a couple more, so if folks haven't asked a question yet.
Governor, do you have an understanding that if the stadium's legislation passes, have the Chiefs and the Royals committed to staying in Missouri?
I've talked to the ownership groups of both teams almost weekly, including this week. As you know, there's going to be a local component that's needed for that. That can't happen as fast as everything else, but the teams have indicated to me if we can get legislative approval passed, obviously somewhat well in advance of the June 30th deadline, and that's not that far away right now, it certainly would be a significant milestone for them to consider what we're doing. So I don't want to speak too much in favor for them, but we've run through several scenarios with them, and I think our piece going first really would send a statement to those communities as well. I think it would be a great step in the right direction. Yes, sir.
Mr. Governor, so there was $20 million for a parking garage here in here in Jefferson City, $15 million to assist with the Missouri Penitentiary, and $4 million for juvenile correction facility here in Jefferson City. Those items they didn't cross the finish line with House Bill 19. Are those items that you would be interested in looking to further in another session?
Well, like I said, obviously we're sensitive to what we see in Jefferson City. It is my wife and I's home, but there's projects sensitive to communities all across the state that are similar to that. So I don't want to weigh out one thing over another that Jefferson City had versus Cape Girardeau or Kennett, Missouri, or St. Joseph, Missouri. There's a lot of projects that help communities in House Bill 19, and as I said earlier, that's part of the big picture that we're looking at on what we can do to take a second quick look at that.
You spoke on a smoother session this year comparatively, as well as the ideas of cooperation, but the Senate pretty much used the nuclear option on Wednesday and forced a vote on both the HJR for related to abortion as well as the sick leave. What thoughts on using that motion, as well as how do you think it's going to reverberate in future sessions?
I'm a big fan, I think you guys know from seeing me work in the Senate, of trying to have the Senate work together and cooperate. But I would say, and I don't say this, with any disrespect, the PQ should not be considered any more of a nuclear option than a long filibuster should be. It's the same coin, just two different sides. The opponents to a piece of legislation have a tool called the filibuster. That, if you use it multiple hours, multiple days, multiple overnight sessions, I think that should be considered a nuclear option as well. So there's two tools on the table, and I'm not sure one should have any more weight than the other. And in the past, when we've seen this legislator under Democratic control in the Senate many years ago, and they didn't use it all the time, but they often used a previous question when the Democrats were in charge to get a priority that they felt through with the Republican minority at the time. So I hear this nuclear option piece. It's not used often. It's a tool that's very much has a lot of thought behind it before it's used. There were a lot of conversations on both those issues. As you know, specifically on Proposition A, 2 overnight sessions where they were filibustered all night long, and there were a couple of compromises that the Democratic Party decided to walk away from, which, as a small businessman, I thought those were horrible compromises, but I would have respected the process if that's what they would have passed. And I'm sure looking back at it, they probably wish they would have taken one of those. But you'd have to ask them that question. But I don't think the PQ, when it's used in conjunction with issues that have had a lot of floor time, a lot of debate, a lot of behind-the-scenes conversation, should be used as any more of a nuclear option than the ability to filibuster something for days sometimes.
Was there ever a grand bargain?
Let's get somebody who hasn't had a chance, if you don't mind.
There's a lot of hurt feelings in the Senate over that PQ, though, and how are you working through those hurt feelings over the PQ and the HB 92 not passing to get that maybe on the bill on the table?
Yeah, it's part of how this building works. People also are people. They have emotions, right? And so sometimes it hits a raw nerve, and time and relationship building is usually the thing that cures that. I don't want to make that sound easy or simple or a snap of a finger, because it's certainly not. But it will take a little bit of rebuilding of some relationships, and I know that folks from both parties and both sides of the building will work hard to try to rebuild those relationships.
One more question, if anyone has a new topic. If we've covered most of it.
Senate Bill 35, the Main Street Downtown Revitalization Bill that included tax credits that were tied to the AT&T building downtown, didn't make it. You're concerned about projects like that are now up in the air?
Yeah, so private investment's going to have to come back and play in some of those projects. I'm very familiar with what they wanted to do downtown. The general consensus was it might have been a little bit too hefty. I think the legislation as filed was $50 million in tax credits. So I think if we continue to look at what that might look like, and I'm not speaking for the House or Senate, maybe a scaled down version of that might have been a little bit more palatable. And again, it's one of those things that just ran out of time. I certainly want to see our downtown core revitalized, whether it's in Kansas City, Springfield, Columbia, or St. Louis. And so we'll continue to look at what tools we have. The entertainment district piece did pass down there. I think that's a good piece. It was also a big priority for St. Louis business leaders. So it's one of those sessions where some things didn't make it across the finish line. I'm sure there'll be further conversation on that as we move forward.
So was it worth it to use the PQ twice and have the Senate leave 2 days early in order to get abortion and the paid sick leave and kill all these other priorities that you might have wanted to get across the finish line?
I don't second guess Senate leadership. They're involved in conversations and different scenarios that that move and change from minute to minute to hour. I respect the fact that they want to work through things. Is it worth it or not worth it? I'm not one of those people that want to criticize a body that I have a lot of respect for, and I know there was a lot of attempts to try to avoid those points, and they unfortunately were not successful. And but again, as I said in the very beginning, I don't think session should be, although it's fresh on everybody's mind because it all just happened this week, I don't think you should grade the 19-ish weeks they were here based on those actions. I think overall, lots of people worked hard together to get compromise between Republicans and Democrats, between House and Senate, and overall, I look at the I'm proud of how the legislators worked and represented their constituents in this district, and the pieces of legislation they got across the finish line were well thought out, well vetted, and they did a great job on that, so I kudos to them. Thank you guys for being here. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Governor.